Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about those Astrix style Arps that you sometimes hear in Astrix. And mainly what I've noticed with those synths is that they morph a lot and that they kind of transform a lot. So that is really what I wanted to capture in this one. Now, as you may be able to imagine, there's a lot going on with this kind of lead. We're using 3 layers that each have their own unique automations. And then we're also doing a little bit of group processing. And of course, because this is a sound from an actual production of mine, I didn't really keep content into account. You can see that I'm using some plugins here that I would normally not use in kind of content. You can see we have isotope trash over here, for example. Meaning that this time the patches that you're going to see aren't going to encapsulate all of the processing, and therefore also the patches that are going to be available up on my Patreon page will miss some of that processing. That being said though, without the group processing, it still sounds very nice. You'll definitely notice that the sound is still morphing and it's still sounding very nice, but you'll also notice that there's now a missing layer to all of the kind of movement of the sound. And that is because with these sounds, it is both important to do the individual modulations. So all of these individual automations over here so that they change over time and become more interesting. But then also when it comes to the group processing, that you have a few automations in here that makes it just really kind of glued together. So that all 3 of the sounds are also following the same automation. And in this case, we're doing that with Serum FX, which I'll get back to in a little bit. But first, let's have a look at the patches. And the very first one is actually very, very simple. We can see that we just have a bunch of saw waves over here going through this flanger. And we just have a single modulation, which is the modulation on the flanger filter cutoff over here, which is this macro. And then in terms of effects, you can see it's again very simple. We're just distorting it a little bit and then removing the lowest frequencies. Now I'm actually automating 2 things within this patch itself. If we open up the automations, we'll also see some of the external automations. But within the Vital patch, we're just automating the macro 1 over here, as well as the filter mix, meaning that these spikes are both becoming more intense over time, as well as raising higher over time. And this creates this really neat energy rising effect. Of course, you can imagine with the higher frequency that already signifies higher energy, but also those higher frequencies, as they get higher, they also tend to get a little bit more resonant. And then I'm exaggerating that effect by having this EQ over here, where we're automating the scale from below 0% all the way up to 200%. And you can see what that does. So this is roughly the starting point of the automation. And if I go up 200%, you can see how that increases the higher frequencies and removes the lower frequencies. Now, as you can imagine, all of this will get really harsh really quickly. And that is why we have this LFO tool over here. Now this LFO tool is both used to make it more plucky via the volume, as well as with the filter cutoff. As you can see, we have the filter enabled over here. If I quickly click on it, you can see that we have a standard low pass filter. And then I'm actually automating the resonance of this filter. So the resonance is actually going up and then down again to kind of counterbalance the aggressiveness that we get out of the last part of the sound. Of course, we never want to get too harsh with the sound, so that is really where the resonance is used to keep that harshness in check. And just at this point over here, we accentuate the sounds a little bit so that this layer can come through the totality of the 3 sounds a little bit more. And then finally, to get the loudness that we want, we have this plus 15 dB boost saturator over here. You can also see that we're turning the output back down, so we're really trying to saturate this and make this a lot more aggressive. And this was in fact the first layer of the sound, and the reason why the saturator is still here like this, why it's so aggressive, is because as you can imagine, with layering sounds, I started off with the 1 layer and I tried to fit that in, and then I decided like, okay, I don't really get everything that I need out of this layer, so I'll add another layer. But some of the effects that I used to actually mix it into the track, including this saturator probably, is still just left from when I tried to actually mix this individual sound into the track. Anyway, I noticed that the sound really was missing a lot of its pluckiness. If you just listen to this one over here, it doesn't really like grab the attention, it doesn't really pluck. Even though we have that LFO on there, which is introducing a lot of the pluckiness, you can hear that towards the end that really fades out, that effect. Of course, that is partially true because the resonance is going down again there. So that is where the second layer comes in. This is just like a basic acid lead idea. And you can really hear that that sound is just plucky all the way through, which is exactly what we're looking for. In terms of the actual sound design, it is not much different. As you can see, we're again starting off with 7 saw waves with 7 voices of unison. I think I even just duplicated over the patch and just adapted it to the sound that I wanted, which is really based around this low pass filter with a lot of resonance that we're making plucky with this envelope over here. Effects-wise, you can see I've changed the distortion type and maybe changed the drive a little bit, but other than that, the processing is the exact same. In terms of post-processing, we have an auto filter over here, which is just there to remove the really high frequencies. I think I'm using this from time to time also to automate in the actual project of the track. Of course, this is a different project for the filming, but within the actual production that I developed this sound, I believe I'm automating this from time to time. I just don't have that in this section over here. And then we just have a high-pass filter to remove the lowest frequencies again. Now, our final patch is interesting because these two together really have everything that you want from the sound, except the nice kind of mid-range grit that I sometimes look for. So I decided to add another layer, which is an octave lower. You can really hear that this kind of develops over time, actually. And you can hear that we get a little bit of a nicer mid-range out of that. And together with the other two sounds, it's going to sound like this. So you can hear the difference there with and without it. We're just kind of losing a little bit of the mid-range focus there. So that is really what I wanted for the last sound. And of course, the lower octave achieves that. But what also achieves that is like a really nice warm patch. We have a single saw wave over here and then we have a detuned saw wave. So we're always going to get some stability out of this first oscillator. In terms of effects, our only automation within the patch itself is actually the German LP that I'm using over here, which is then going into a tube distortion to get out really that grittiness that we want. And then we're filtering out the lowest frequencies that we don't really need. You can see we have that again over here. And we also have filtering both on the low frequency as well as on the high frequency. For the low frequency, what I often like to do is also automate the Q factor. So the Q factor is slowly going up, meaning that kind of like the lowest mid-range of this filter is slowly going up, while the frequency itself is going down. So that's kind of opening up the sound in both ways, both on the low frequency and of course also on the high frequency, which is just a simple low pass which is coming in over time. And you can see if I swoop around it, what kind of movement we get out of the EQ. So it's just kind of coming in from the mid-range like this and just slowly filling up the spectrum more and more, meaning that we're slowly going to get more of that octave lower kind of grit that we're after with this patch. In terms of group processing, there's not much going on. As we can see over here, we have isotope trash here, which is really just meant for the distortion. Without it, you can see that the sound is a lot weaker. After that, we have another EQ again to just filter it in ever so slightly. What I often notice is that stacking filters on top of each other like this and then using some processes to slightly reintroduce those higher frequencies can be really nice. That is, of course, what we're doing with the saturation over here. We're going to get higher frequencies. And of course, some of these are low pass over here and this one as well from time to time. So we're reintroducing frequencies that we're already filtering out and then we're filtering them out again. It's just a nice way to add a little bit of like extra detail to the movement of the sound. You can imagine that it is a stage of filtering out, and that filtering is changing over time, and then we're slightly saturating that signal, but that saturation gives us too many high frequencies, so we're again filtering it in over time. And all of that together is going to sound nicer than just an individual low-pass filter opening up over time. Next up, we have the delay. Not much to say about this, just fairly basic, fairly static. There's no automations whatsoever. And then the final thing that we're doing is this phaser effect. So that is this thing over here. In the beginning, it's not really doing much, so I can turn it on now, but you can't really hear it. Towards the end is where you really start to hear it once I turn it on. So this is the phaser effect. As you can see, we're using the phaser 48 Plus over here, and we're just automating 4 different parameters of it. As you can see, we've set all of them to macros because that is easier to work with in the Serum FX version. Of course, when you're using Serum FX, make sure that node latch is turned on over here. Otherwise, none of these macros are actually going to work. But you can see that we're automating the drive over time, so it becomes a little bit louder over time. The mix over time, we have the resonance, and then the filter cutoff. And all 4 of these parameters are opening up over time, except for the filter cutoff, which is just doing the actual like phaser movement here. In this case, it's emulating a 4-bar modulation. I actually like to use the phaser like this over the actual phaser from time to time because you have so much control over the modulation. Like I could theoretically draw in any curve that I want over here. I just noticed that just the basic 4-bar modulation seems to work really well here. But still, of course, you have control over the resonance and the drive, which is really nice because then you can kind of have it come in a nicer way. Again, what you'll notice is that I'm not just using one parameter to introduce this effect over time. We're using the drive to slowly get more of this filter in there by just driving the filtered signal. We of course have the mix, which is slowly turning up, therefore slowly engaging the filter. And then we also have the resonance, which makes the effect more focused and therefore stand out more over time. And all 3 of these effects are slowly morphing in together. Now that is everything there is to these 3 patches. I'm not going to go into making them from scratch, because as you can probably tell from this tutorial, it is much more simple in terms of like actual sound design than you would expect. When you listen to such a complex and continuously morphing sound, you don't really expect it to just be a couple of saw waves and 1 filter per patch. But that is really all there is happening in all 3 of these patches over here. In this vital, of course, in this one over here as well. This is a few saw waves, 1 filter, and then okay, a tiny bit of processing, but this is the easiest stuff in the world. And here as well, we have a bunch of saw waves going through a singular filter with a little bit of distortion and removal of the lowest frequencies. So basically, all 3 patches are very similar in what they're trying to do, and they're very, very easy in terms of the sound design that they employ. And that is really where your mindset should be at when you're making these kind of sounds. You're not really trying to get this really complex, moving, constantly changing sound out of an individual saw wave patch. What you're doing is you're trying to get a few different categories of sounds and just grab a few different characteristics. So for example, we have the flanger of one of them, we have the pluckiness of the other one of them, and we have the lower octave of the third. And you're slowly kind of trying to morph those together and then glue it even more together with some of the processing that you do on all 3. So you can imagine that for each of these sounds, we're just kind of generating a single idea. Here it is that flanger filter, which we're like slowly having come in more and more with this EQ over here. We make it sometimes a little bit more plucky with this LFO tool so that it doesn't get too aggressive. And then it's going to go into the group processing where it's actually going to get glued together with the other 2 sounds. And the same is true with the pluckiness of this one as well as the lower octave of this one. So that is the real takeaway of the sound. Of course, all of the patches are going to be available up on my Patreon page if you want to check them out, which is an amazing way to support the channel. Another way to do that is by checking out some more of my content, so I'll leave 2 videos up on the screen for you to choose from. So just pick one and enjoy, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.